aware that everyone has a lot of things to do in their day. No, I certainly do. So you don't want to take up too much of your time. Again, thank you so much for joining. My name is Kim Napoli. This is a Cannabis Accounting 101 webinar hosted by Vicente Cedarberg, the law firm. We have expert in the space, Angela L'Esperance, with us today as well from Miss Jane Accounting. She has agreed to regale us with all of the benefit of her wisdom and experience in this space and give an overview of a number of topics related to accounting in the cannabis industry. Just by way of background, I work as the counsel and director of diversity, equity, and inclusion for Vicente Cedarberg. I am a part of the brand new Impact and ESG group, along with my partner, Mark Ross. The group is dedicated to supporting environmental social governance, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and corporate social responsibility plans for operators within the cannabis space or around the cannabis space. These are areas in which we've seen an increase in focus in recent years and even recent months. It's increasing. You may see some reports that have just started coming out. What is important to note is that these things aren't going away anytime soon. Focus on these areas comes from government interests, comes from employees, it comes from the communities that you operate in and around. So if you're not paying attention to these things, you should be in short order. And if you need any assistance in that, please reach out to me or my partner, Mark Ross, for that. To the extent that there is social equity that in the industry and a focus on supporting that, things like accounting are of absolute importance. And that is the reason for this, this webinar today. We want to make sure that folks who are operating in the equity space, who have previously been disenfranchised by the war on drugs, or have been disproportionately impacted, are able to enter the industry and have the tools to do so. Angela has agreed to come and give us just a bit of a base level background on how folks who are in the social equity space can really kind of prime themselves for success. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Angela, and she's going to tell us what we need to know. Thank you, Angela.
Great. Thank you, Kim. Hello and welcome, everyone. Let me share my screen real quick and make sure we can all see the presentation. All right, Kim, are we good on that?
Yes, we are good to go.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so Cannabis 101. Accounting here with Angela from Miss Jane Accounting. Thank you for your time today. I am the owner and founder of Miss Jane Accounting, which is an all-female cannabis accounting firm. My accounting career started 17 years ago. At the age of 21, I decided to start my first business while attending college full-time. I wrote my business plan in Business 101, submitted it for review, and opened the doors. I quickly learned at the age of 21 how important it is to have an accounting or tax advisor, someone that knows a little bit more than you that can specialize and advise you while you're running your business. I later went on to graduate with a double major in accounting and business management. Growing up in a small town fueled my passion for small businesses, and my experience as a young business owner shined a light on the need for having the proper advisors. Throughout my career, I intentionally diversified my accounting experience so then I could eventually reach the advisor role. I worked as a bookkeeper in private and public accounting and in tax firms and as an outsourced CFO. I saw the same need for trusted advisors in the cannabis space, so I translated my experience to the green rush. I'm going to click over to this side real quick so I can give you a brief overview. As we all know, the cannabis industry is a highly complex space. It's growing at a rapid pace and is highly audited and regulated. Miss Jane Accounting is an all-female cannabis accounting firm that works with growers, manufacturers, and retailers and ancillary companies in the cannabis space. We have a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as social, racial, and economic justice in the cannabis industry. Working with cannabis business owners and helping them thrive is my passion. At Miss Jane Accounting, we are more than just an accounting firm. We are trusted advisors for our clients. We understand that being a small business owner, you may need to wear a lot of hats. We get it. So we worked really hard to kind of take some things off of your plate for you so you can do what you do best, which is grow and operate your business. I'm here today to talk to you about a few high-level points regarding accounting in the cannabis industry. First, I'd like to take a quick poll question. So Jen, if you wouldn't mind putting up the first poll, I'd like to see who is in our audience today. And Kim, let me know if you can see that on your end, because I can't see it on my end.
I do not see the poll. However, let me check.
Sorry guys, having some issues with the polls that we created previously. I'm gonna work on that and maybe we can post them later.
Okay, we can definitely move forward. Maybe in the meantime, if everybody wants to throw in the chat where they're watching from, that would be helpful.
That would be great.
All right, so we'll move on. Let me know, Jen, if you get those up and running. All right, so rules and regulations in the cannabis space, as we all know, there's a lot of them. Until marijuana, which is also known as Delta 9, becomes federally legal or descheduled, it's considered a Schedule I drug, controlled substance. Other Schedule I controlled substances include heroin and LSD. Schedule I drugs are considered by the DEA as high potential for abuse and the potential to create severe psychological and or physical dependence, which can result in criminal prosecution. So as we all know, more studies have been performed on cannabis, and it has been found that this may not be an appropriate category anymore. But until that changes, we have very specific rules and regulations that need to be followed. A couple of these regulations include IRS Section 280E and IRC 471. The US Code Section 280E is a federal statute mandated by the IRS opposing an illegal business. Since cannabis is still a Schedule I drug, cannabis businesses fall into the category of drug trafficking. Section 280E forbids businesses that generate revenue from drug trafficking from deducting any expenses from their gross income. Cost of goods sold is the exception to this rule, even for products that are illegal under federal law. Costs of goods sold mainly pertain to inventory costs, seeds, soil, water, etc. for a cultivation business, for example. As a result of 280E, cannabis business owners pay an incredibly high amount of taxes. As you can imagine, if you can't deduct any of your business expenses or most of your business expenses, you're claiming mainly income. And then you're paying tax on that income. CBD and hemp companies can deduct normal business expenses, but cost accounting is still a requirement in order to be compliant. So even though CBD and hemp is not a Schedule I controlled substance, it is important to proceed with extreme caution because it's still a highly audited and regulated area. So IRC 471 are the general rules for inventories. According to this code section, Delta 9 operators can make certain adjustments to cost of goods sold. This is saying that you can take some more adjustments by way of cost of goods sold, but you need to make sure you're doing this correctly. A cannabis accountant can advise you what qualifies as cost of goods sold by utilizing IRC 471 in conjunction with Section 280E. Cost accounting is essential for cannabis and CBD hemp accounting and tax. If you are not properly doing cost accounting, you could be paying too much in taxes and missing out on some of the benefits of IRC 471. Although tax law can be confusing and vague, we all know there's some difficult interpretations and possibly some gray areas, but having a cannabis specialized accountant will help you navigate the tax code, help implement proper documentation, and work to keep you compliant. As I mentioned, this is a highly audited space, so it is essential to have pristine records, accurate and timely bookkeeping, supporting documentation, and tax returns filed. Not following these regulations can result in extremely high penalties, interest, possible loss of your license, and for some, still even jail time. So please be mindful of that as you're working in this space. Okay, so top 3 accounting don'ts. Do not attempt your own bookkeeping. I know some programs kind of advertise that anyone can do this or it's very easy, and that gets a lot of people in trouble, unfortunately. So unless you have a background in accounting, double-sided journal entries, and have a full understanding of 280E and IRC 471, I highly recommend you get a cannabis specialized accountant. Most of the time when someone has been doing their own books, in my experience, once they hire an accountant, the accountant needs to go back and redo everything and start all over from scratch. This can be really time consuming and costly for the client and the accountant. They end up paying for the subscription throughout the months that they've been doing their own books, only for it to become an unusable file. So some banks, investors, and state licensing agencies require rock solid financials, and that starts with your accounting. I recently had 2 clients come to me saying they were using QBO, QuickBooks Online, and doing the bookkeeping themselves. One went as far to say is, it's easy. I just added a couple of rules and the transactions pretty much coded themselves. Well, when I went into their file, I found that there were 5,961 transactions that needed to be reconciled. And that was just for 2021. So because of that, I'm now having to go back all the way to 2018 and correct their books and get their taxes filed for them. And the taxes, that includes their business taxes, but then also having to go back and amend their personal taxes. So you can imagine how much time that will take, and it can add up. So you definitely want to make sure that you're going about this the right way. Despite some programs saying anybody can do it, we want to take caution on some of those stances. The other
Angela,
could
I jump in real quick? I just wanted to ask a clarifying question. You're speaking broadly about federal tax and accounting for federal taxes, correct?
Yes, 280E is a federal regulation.
Right. So there are some states, however, that do collect tax on cannabis operations. Not all states do, but some do. And there is, I believe, is an additional reason to have an accountant, because things get even more specific and the states can be even more aggressive with respect to tax collection than the federal government can.
Yes, absolutely. That's such a great point to add. Thank you. Yes, so as Kim mentioned, there's definitely state and local regulations that need to be followed as well. What we're focusing mainly on is the federal side. And going back to the 2 clients I was talking about, the other client wasn't as bad as the $5,000 or $6,000 transaction client, but they did have 1,500 transactions that needed to be reconciled that they were not aware of. Neither of these examples included the personal or cash paid expenses that needed to be accounted for. There's journal entries for payroll that need to be accounted for, possibly depreciation, and cost of goods adjustments that need to happen. Both clients would have paid way more in tax than they should have if this were not corrected. So some tax preparers just take your file and trust that it's accurate. You really want someone who's going to be looking at the bookkeeping aspect of it as well, because as I found, there was a big discrepancy on what they should have been reporting. Also, if they would have been audited, this would have been a really big mess for both of them. All right, so the second point here is do not try to work around or avoid Section 280E. If you come across anyone that says they can, I suggest not working with them. The penalties are so high and the risk is not worth it. It's no longer if you get audited, it's when you get audited. And right now, 280E is what it is, and we simply need to comply until the rules change. I highly recommend cannabis business owners get a high level familiarity with Section 280E for their own business purposes. because a cultivator will have different 280E deductions than a retailer will, for instance. It's important to know what you're able to deduct. Having that knowledge, that base knowledge, will help you find the right people who will comply with 280E rather than try to avoid or work around it, because the courts are currently winning in every single case involved with 280E. There's a case out there right now where the IRS implemented $78,000 in penalties because they found poor record keeping, no physical inventory counts, lack of check registers, and incorrect cost of goods allocations. So this is serious. You know, I wouldn't emphasize it so much if it wasn't, because the penalties are averaging around $100,000 per case. So this is not to be taken lightly. All right, the last point here is do not assume any software connected to your accounting software is translating and calculating correctly. So with that being said, reconciliations between software need to happen on a regular basis, even if the program claims that they run together. Not reconciling the software programs and platforms that work together has proven to be very costly for clients. You may have a POS system or seed to sale software, which is great, but you need to make sure you're reconciling those reports to ensure that the data is flowing to your accounting software and ensuring that it's accurate. Right now, there are not a lot of good systems that work well together, even for accounting systems in the cannabis space. So I'm hoping in the near future, someone gets this nailed down to make it a little bit easier and efficient for everyone. Fingers crossed. All right. Now on to 3 accounting do's. So this may sound counterintuitive to some people, but tell your accountant everything, whether it be your business or personal goals. If expensive equipment broke down, for instance, if you need to make a large purchase, if there's a transaction over $10,000 in cash, if you're operating in another state, etc. You never know the tax implications of business changes or purchases until you talk with your accountant. Your accountant cannot properly advise if they do not have the big picture down to the nitty-gritty details. And I'm sure Kim can relate, because this is similar for lawyers. Lawyers want to protect you. Your accountants want to protect you. And in order to protect you and serve you, they need the big picture. They need all the details. I cannot tell you how many times a client in a casual conversation has brought up something important or something that has tax implications, and it just happened in a side-off conversation. It's like, hold on, let's talk about this a little bit more. So you really want to make sure you're telling them everything.
That's a great point. And I'll just add to that in addition to being, workers, people who are assisting you as clients in this space, we are also advocates for you. Mm-hmm. And whereas cannabis is a, relatively new, at least as a regulated in recent history industry, find ourselves in a position where we are actually telling the regulatory authorities how it should be, right? It's as new to them as it is to some of the folks entering the space, or at least those who haven't been participating in the traditional space. So we want to be able to advocate for you properly. That requires honesty and being upfront. So to protect yourself, allow us to help you, be clear, and let us know the nitty-gritty, the details.
Yep. Absolutely. Another example is I came across a situation where a seed to sale program and the bank reconciliations weren't tying out. So I went to the client to inquire about the difference. After some digging, the client suddenly remembered that they put personal funds into their account. And this was brand new to me. So I had no idea that there was personal money going into the business account. And since most deposits are assumed to be business sales, and sales are reported as taxable income, this is something very important that your accountant or your bookkeeper should know. Because if we did not have that conversation, they would have been overstating their income, and they would have been taxed on that income that should not have been taxed and would have paid more in tax. So definitely keep those conversations open with your accountant, and like Kim said, with your lawyer as well. Second point here is to be proactive versus reactive. Talk to your lawyer, and this applies to your accountant as well, before you make any major decision, major purchases, major sales. Definitely, just like Kim mentioned, you want to fill in your lawyer just like your accountant prior to big decisions. Because in both cases, if you discuss it after it's done, there's not much your accountant in this case could do. It's done. I've had a lot of clients ask for help after contracts have been signed or after major purchases have been made. And at that point, there's not a ton left to be done because it's done, right? For example, if you made a major purchase that tapped into your cash flow and suddenly you're unable to pay your bills, you're now scrambling to look for cash and look for that money, right? Had you talked to your accountant before making this large purchase, your accountant would have been able to look at your reports, look at your cash flow, and maybe suggest to put off that purchase until cash flow is in a better position. Because it's a lot easier to hold off on a purchase than to spend all your money and then try to find more money, right? So not to mention, you'll want to discuss the tax implications to your accountant. Large purchases should be considered in the years with higher income to create the most tax advantageous situation for you. So maybe this year you're anticipating less income, and next year you're thinking it'll be a little bit higher. Maybe you invested in some marketing, or maybe your name has had the chance to get out there. But if you wait to make that large purchase until the year where you have more income, that can better offset your taxable income, potentially reduce your tax liability. And so this is why these conversations you want to have with your accountant, so they can do that planning for you and they can think ahead for you. It's much easier to think ahead than to look back. If you're considering getting investors or signing any sort of contract, you'll want your lawyer and possibly your accountant to review before you sign anything. Absolutely lawyer first. Accountants can help too, just to have a second pair of eyes on things. And also it's just good to fill them in on what's going on. I can't tell you how many times I heard people say they signed this agreement and then ask for advice afterwards. It's just, you don't do that, and be proactive. All right, so the last point here is one I cannot stress enough. Do get a cannabis specialized accountant. This space is very complex. Over 80% of the cannabis financials are not correct since they do not have a cannabis specialized accountant. Again, compliance starts with proper accounting methods, and there are extremely high penalties and fines for inaccurate financials and accounting methods. I tell my clients all the time that we only know what we know, right? Most business owners do not know the accounting rules and regulations that are required in the cannabis industry. So you want to get someone who does. To the point of we only know what we know, I don't claim to know half of what Kim knows on the law side. This is something where myself even has to get the proper advisors in place. In my case, this would be a lawyer. In a lot of people's case, it would be an accountant. I had a client nonchalantly one time tell me they received a sales tax notice stating they owed $36,000 and I should keep an eye out for that payment. And I said, wait a minute, hold on. Before you do anything, you want to put me in contact with the sales tax auditor. So then I worked directly with the auditor. I helped them find an answer to every question, pulled every receipt, provided an explanation of the business, provided tax exempt forms. And by the time I was done with the auditor, they only owed $600. And that was because we couldn't find one receipt. So always, always, always send your IRS and state notices to your accountant before doing anything. They would have paid $36,000 instead of $600. And you can imagine what that could do to somebody's cash flow and how difficult it could be to get that money back. So keep that in mind.
While I have you on, while you're on this topic of a cannabis specialized accountant, can you give a couple of either questions or examples of what someone looking for a cannabis specialized accountant would ask, what they should look for to make sure that they're getting someone who is worth the money they'll be spending?
Yes, so definitely ask if they are cannabis specialized and, you know, what training they've done or what their experience is. Mainly just because for some reason in this space, a lot of people claim to know something about cannabis, and then you start working with them and it's not entirely true. So definitely ask if, you know, if their main industry is retail, for instance, and they're operating mainly with non-cannabis firms, definitely want to make sure that they are zoned into this space, and if not entirely exclusively for cannabis, make sure that it's a very high percentage. And also making sure they're aware of the 280E regulations. This is where a high level understanding of 280E could really benefit the client. I'm not saying read all the IRS regulations, but if you're a grower, for instance, get some high level basic information on what 280E means for your business. So then if you have an accountant, first question you ask, what do you know about 280E? That will tell you first off whether or not this accountant works in cannabis or not. So those are two things to look out for.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. All right, good question, Kim, thank you. Okay, so great segue actually, how a cannabis specialized accountant can help. So timely and accurate audit-ready financials are extremely important. For some states, it's a requirement for your license. If you're banking with cannabis-friendly banks, sometimes that's a requirement in order to maintain your bank account. Section 280E compliance, massive, has to be compliant. Cost accounting, part of being compliant, you need that. Flower calendar. If you're a grower and you don't know how long it takes for that seed to go in the soil and to get harvested, you're going to have a hard time planning. They can work on flower calendars for you, help you prepare, help you plan. Internal controls and SOPs. This is a big one. Not everybody knows where the weak spots are in their business. Having an extra pair of eyes on some of these controls and SOPs is going to be really important for you. You want someone who can advise you on these pieces. Cash counts and controls. There's a lot of theft in this area. You want to make sure that in a space where you are operating mainly in cash, that you have proper cash counts happening on a regular basis. Every time there's a shift change at the end of the day, beginning of day, and controls in place, so there's no room for error and there's no room for theft. Seed to sale, inventory tracking, tailored chart of accounts, gap requirements, and connecting you with other cannabis-friendly banks, software platforms, etc. So as you can see, this space is quite involved and you want the right people handling your books. Compliance starts with your bookkeeping and your record keeping. You also need good numbers to make good business decisions, right? The average accuracy related penalties are ranging around $100,000, and the IRS is currently winning against almost every company that does not comply. Harborside is a well-known court case where they did not properly account for cost of goods sold according to the courts, and they were forced to pay $11 million in back taxes. So unless you have an extra, 20 million lying around, most of us do not, you definitely want to make sure that you do not skimp in this area of proper advising. You may think you cannot afford an accountant, but the fact is you cannot afford to not have one. I had a client where I had asked before they came on board, I asked, do you know which products are making you money? They're a vertically integrated company, so that means they have their grow operation, they do their own processing, the manufacturing, and they've got their retail store. Their response to my question was, well, I'm able to pay my bills, so I must be doing something right. And to the point, like, yes, but that only lasts so long. They later called me in tears because they were so stressed out. And this is one thing that I had been trying to get them to focus on is we need to get your books where they need to be. You need a proper accountant. You need a flower calendar, internal controls, cost accounting. And without these things, you're driving blind. And I say that because you cannot properly make well-informed business decisions without the proper tools and the proper accurate numbers. I cannot emphasize this enough. All right, so this is how every accountant looks when they hear someone's doing their own books. It's not always a good idea. Okay, so common issues and errors. As I previously mentioned, unusable QuickBooks Online or other accounting software files is a big issue we run into. Unless you have a background in bookkeeping, double-sided journal entries, and a good grasp of 280E, you'll want to hire a cannabis specialized accountant. Inconsistent business names. This is actually a good one. I was kind of surprised at how often I'm running into this issue. So I really encourage you to take a look at your EIN letter, which is also known as the EIN verification letter 147C or CP 575. This is a letter you receive when you register for a federal EIN. So make sure you have that handy. Look at, if you registered as an LLC, you should have documents with the Secretary of State or other local agencies stating the business is an LLC. What I've run into a lot is I've seen the LLC documents, and then when I look at the EIN letter, there's no LLC included in the name. Inconsistent business names across the state ID, if it's required, Secretary of State documents, and or your IRS documents can cause issues down the road. In the case of an LLC, for instance, your LLC may not protect you the way intended if the names are not consistent. All right, entity structure election. Always consult your accountant and your lawyer as it pertains to an entity structure. For example, a single owner registration may default to a sole member, which can then result in filing a Schedule C tax return. This means that your business income and expenses are reported on an additional schedule on your individual return rather than on a separate business tax return. This will result in having income tax and self-employment tax. So a lot of people forget about that piece. Also, if a husband and wife are involved in the business, it could possibly force them to file a partnership return. Partnerships are required to have partnership agreements. If you're an S Corp, you need to make sure that you're on payroll with reasonable pay in order to maintain your S status. So depending on your entity structure, you may be required to keep meeting minutes. If you're an LLC, is your LLC set up correctly, and do you need an annual renewal? Depending on the current situation of your business, how many owners, the future goals of the company, if you're looking for investments, will all determine the type of entity structure you want to elect, which is why I highly recommend you get the accountant and the lawyer together to talk about these things, because there's legal implications and then there's tax implications also to think about. So consult with both. As you can see, there are a lot of things to consider. So you'll want to have the proper people in place to help guide you through all of this. I also want to caution anyone working with automated legal services that set up entity structures. The entity structure you select does have legal and tax implications. So I highly recommend that you work with an actual lawyer and an actual accountant rather than a computer program. The next point, plan, then plan some more. Writing one plan won't be sufficient. You're going to find in this space that there's things you didn't know right away, or tax law changes or local laws change. So you're going to have to write a plan, but then you're also going to have to adapt and adjust your plans. So don't be alarmed by that. It's perfectly normal. It's common. And it should actually be expected in this space in particular. Budget. I can't stress this enough. Without a budget, you're walking into a lion's den, blindfolded with one arm tied behind your back, and you're expecting to win. It's just not possible. I'm not saying this to scare you, but this is actually a fact. You're going to want to know how much this is going to cost you. If you're going to build a greenhouse, for instance, you want to know what that's going to take. You're going to want to know how much a lawyer is going to cost, an accountant. Just start making notes of these. If you're good with a spreadsheet, start with the spreadsheet. If you've never made a budget before, start with your personal budget. Start writing down all of your expenses, what it costs you to live. That's also helpful as you're writing your business budget, because you need to know how much you need to take home after paying your business bills and all the expenses on the business side, what you need to take home in order to pay your bills personally as well. As we all know, cash is king. So you're going to want to know what it's going to cost you before you quit your job or you invest all of your savings. Just know that once you create a budget, much like your plan, it will take some modification and adjustments, and it will grow with you as you grow your business.
Angela, we had one question that was just on previous slide you had. It was,
Sure.
What is a flower calendar? I just wanted to, before we move too far away from it, if you could just explain that quickly.
Yes, so a flower calendar is, if you're a grower, typically people have a few strains. You know, if you do have a few strains or one, it doesn't matter, but you typically start a calendar, and it's basically tracking that seed from the day you put it in the soil, tracking how many days it takes to get all the way through the process to harvest. And that's helpful because when you're budgeting, and if you're, for instance, if you're doing indoor greenhouses and you can have multiple grow seasons in a year, or if you're in a climate that allows that outdoors, you're going to want to know how long it takes to get through that entire flower calendar. So then you're able to predict how many grow seasons you can have. And then that's also the start of your cost accounting as well.
Excellent. That's a great point. And this is also something where I'd love to just highlight the sort of marriage of how the accounting piece and also the advocacy and legal piece can help, because a lot of times folks are looking to get their seeds into the ground, and they can't do so without approval from the authority. This is for first-time new licensees. Starting out your business, and you have projections based on when you can put those seeds into the ground. However, if you can't get your license, then you're continually pushing out that start date, which pushes out your harvest date, which pushes out your profits date. So making sure that you have appropriate representation on both sides, folks who are able to help you navigate the licensing process so that you avoid any unnecessary pitfalls that are going to take up time and extend the time you're waiting to actually receive that license, is really essential at the output. I always say this to everyone, but your team is everything. You want to make sure that you have that solidly in place at the outset so that you're moving forward with full information, and you have everything at your fingertips ready to activate as necessary, as opposed to playing catch up at the end when it's often just going to be a matter of cleanup and damage control.
Oh my gosh, yes. And thank you. Such a great point. And to the point of having the right people aligned also, if, you know, there's a phrase, it takes a village, right? I don't think that holds true in any other industry more so than it does in this space. It's so important. It's such a massive space. There's so many moving pieces. It's so regulated and highly audited. It definitely takes a village. So I'm with you on that one. Okay, this last bit on the common issues and errors is that marriage, like you were talking about in this village piece. You know, you want to know what you're getting into. Do not sign anything without a lawyer or your accountant or any other advisor reviewing it. Lawyer first, absolutely first. And it helps to have a couple of other pairs of eyes on it, because once it's signed, it's signed. I know of a company that was looking for investors, and the owner unknowingly signed over 51% of his company. That's controlling interest that was signed over, and they had no idea. I'd like to caution you that this is also a highly predatory industry, especially when it comes to social equity applicants, due to the priority consideration of licensing process, the reduced application and licensing fees, low interest loans, etc. Please be mindful as you're partnering up with people and looking for investors and signing agreements, all of that, that not everyone has your best interest in mind. And if it seems too good to be true, it's probably so. So please have your lawyer look at everything.
You're here. I'll also just quickly add, while we're on the topic of lawyers and advisors, that if you tell your lawyer and your advisor that you are a social equity applicant or economic empowerment or otherwise part of some group that is given this priority based on your status as someone who's been impacted by the war on drugs or as a minority or underrepresented minority in the space, they'll often give you discounted rates. Low bono, pro bono service. So these are advantages you certainly should be looking for and taking advantage of. They are available. We certainly offer them at our firm. I know Angela has some availability of services to make things easier for applicants in the space, but that's something you should be looking out for also. If folks won't cut you a deal, that doesn't mean that they're not savory, but there are folks who will. So it's absolutely worth looking for.
Absolutely. That's such a good point, because as we know, as a startup business, you're running by your bootstraps. Things are tight. We only know what we know. So it's really important to look for people who have those aligned goals, especially people willing to work with startups and social equity applicants. Great point, Kim. Thank you. Okay, so preparing for year end, perfect timing. As I mentioned, take a look at your EIN letter, your state ID, and your Secretary of State documents if you have them. Are the names consistent? That's a really good place to start. Know your filing requirements and deadlines. You can find this out on your EIN letter to see what your tax filing requirements are. This letter tells you the form you need to file and the deadline. So for example, form 1120 is due April 15th for a tax filing. But if you have an S Corp, which is an 1120S, or a partnership, those are due on March 15th. So be mindful of deadlines. Do you have to file sales tax? Do you have an LLC renewal? Is it past due? Do you have to file a form 8300 to report a cash payment over $10,000? These are important things to know as a business owner. At this point in time, with tax season coming up and right after year end, I highly suggest you get all of your setup documents together, which includes your EIN letter, state letters, state ID, Secretary of State letters, any licensing confirmations, any agreements you have. Start getting that together and start getting it organized, because if you currently don't have an accountant and or a lawyer, you're going to want to get one, and they are going to want to see these documents. If you don't have a separate business bank account with all business transactions running through it, I suggest start making a spreadsheet to kind of track your out-of-pocket expenses, which means any business expense that was paid with for personal money. That's an out-of-pocket expense. It's not running through a business account. It's through your personal account. Any transactions that are made with cash, start putting those together so you have those. You'll want to make sure that everything gets accounted for. And you definitely want to make sure it's getting accounted for the right category, and you're not paying a penny more in tax than you need to. Lastly, get your receipts in order. There are apps that can help you keep record of your receipts, but mostly just make sure they're organized. I had a client show up one time with a plastic bag full of crumpled up receipts, and I can tell you with most accountants, that's not going to fly. Start sorting through them, put them into categories if you're comfortable, but at the very least, get them in date order. This is not only helpful for your accountant, it's helpful for you, because if you ever are looking for something, if you take the time to organize it now, rather than a year later, it'll be much more efficient. And then you just have to organize it one time. Get it in date order, pin it together by months if that's helpful, or categories, one way or another, get it organized, because then also if you're audited, this can really be helpful in case of an audit. So get organized, then maintain the organization. I'm sure we can all relate to this picture that's on here. All right. So no one said it would be easy. Starting a business is not easy, and it's definitely not for the weary. I can't tell you how many times my clients have called me crying, super stressed out. I had to, walk them off the ledge. They wanted to confide in me, or they just needed a little bit of a pep talk. Sometimes accountants, and I'm sure lawyers too, can be a little bit of a therapist, but we do what we have to do for our clients and make sure they're okay.
That's right. There's a lot of, we call it, oftentimes there's hand holding and there's
Yes.
coaching. And I mean, I'm a firm believer that, your client, as an attorney at least, that my clients should be almost like friends. I mean, you obviously keep, there's differences, but you should be able to trust me, and I should be able to trust that what you're telling me is the truth, so that I can really and truly help you. If you're in it for the right reasons, particularly speaking towards social equity applicants, the support that I have come to understand this group requires is something that requires me to dig deep and make sure that I'm giving them exactly what they need to succeed. So it's not easy, but it's a group effort. And I think, working together with someone who is as dedicated to the cause as you are to your own success is really what's going to get you the best result.
Absolutely. That brings me to my 2 exact points. So that's perfect. One of the best pieces of advice that I can give you is to have a plan. Be mindful in the fact that your plan is most likely going to change multiple times, especially in a growing industry. But also be realistic with your plan, and be patient. This is a big space. Be patient with yourself. There's a lot to do and a lot involved with running a business. If it were easy to run a business, everybody would be doing it and everybody would be successful, but that's not the case. So plan, be realistic, also be a little patient too. And then lastly, just like Kim said, you want to line yourself up people that you enjoy working with and that you trust. Trust is a big thing. It's like a relationship. You need to make sure you can trust the advice you're receiving. You want to make sure these people have your interests in mind. They're here to protect you. And you also want people that know a thing or two that you don't know. And that's really how you get that well-rounded advisory. It's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to know that you don't know everything. That's why we have advisors. Everybody needs an advisor. I need an advisor. Kim needs an advisor. Like we mentioned before, it takes a village. And lastly, a little quote here. There are no secrets to success. It is a result of preparation, hard work, and learning from failure. Everyone's going to have failures. Everyone's going to have setbacks and struggles. You're not special if you fail. We all go through it. So I say embrace it, learn from it, and grow from it, and work on building your resilience. So that's all I have on that. Here's a couple of resources for you. And then we will also pop into questions, because I'm guessing the poll questions are not working. Is that correct?
No, we did not. We weren't able to get the poll questions working. We can ask the same questions to folks and have them just enter their answers in the chat.
Sure.
We did get a lot of responses from where folks are in the country, and it spans the country. Lots of places. It's really awesome to see how many people from different corners of the country came to view us. I didn't see any international participation, but that's okay. I won't hold it against you guys. One thing I would just add to kind of wrap this up is to say that this is just, it's an industry in which the landscape changes very quickly. We have state laws that are being created daily. States that still don't have any form of legalization. We've got decrim, medical, and adult use. There are new license types being created. There is also the looming reality of national legalization on the horizon that is at some point coming. And with that will bring its own a whole host of different issues. All of these things are, again, why it is essential to have a team, have the long game in mind. I think one of the things I've heard the most in this industry is that this is a marathon and not a sprint. Though you may be
Yes.
sprinting through a lot of this marathon, you will be
Yes.
sprinting for a while. So you really just want to be sure that you're setting yourself up for long-term success. And what that looks like in this industry, what long-term success looks like will be one different for everybody. Everyone has their own individual goals, but also it's largely unknown because who knows will we have interstate commerce in the next couple of years? And when that happens, the local folks who have a stranglehold on their markets, will that change? Larger players, there's a huge consolidation of the market going on right now. Things are very, very likely to change. It happens all the time. So again, you want to make sure you've aligned yourself with folks who are ready to take on those changes with you and also can keep you abreast of how those changes impact you. Angela and I are both available for retention. Again, we both offer rates that are favorable to social equity and economic empowerment and otherwise underrepresented minorities in the space. Please feel free to reach out. We do have our contact slides, or rather our contacts on a later slide that you'll see shortly. We're going to slip over to the Q&A because we have a couple minutes left for that. Angela, can you see the Q&A?
So I actually can see the chat here, and
Just
I see
to the
a really
left.
good,
Sorry, go ahead.
question. Oh, do you mind if I read one question from the chat that I see? That's a really good question. It says, why do you think cannabis business owners do not see the value in having an accountant who specializes in cannabis? That is a great question. I don't think it's a matter of well, number one, budget's always a thing, right? A lot of people tend to put accounting and advisory relationships off on the back burner, for instance. They don't build it into their budget. So that's kind of the first mistake I would say. You definitely want to build these advisory pieces into your budget, but also having a cannabis specialized advisor is extremely important. What happens sometimes, that I've seen at least, is people get very comfortable with the people they work with, right? It's hard to let new people in, new advisors in. And what happens with people who are already business owners, they're like, well, I've been working with this guy for 20 years. I don't want to leave him and I don't want to cause any conflict. And that's where people get into a lot of trouble because their traditional accountant doesn't know the scope of cannabis regulations. And that's what gets people into a lot of trouble. So it may not be an intentional decision. They may just not have it budgeted correctly, or they may just not know how in depth this space is and why they need someone who is cannabis specialized. So good question.
So one question that I did see a lot that I would love to talk about goes back to what you mentioned about 280E and
Yes.
cost of goods sold. And I'm wondering if specifically for cultivation, like we know that there's some cannabis businesses that can gain a more significant benefit from the credits available related to the cost of goods sold. What do those look like?
Yes. So for every cannabis business, that's going to look differently. Number one, you want to think about direct costs. So that's your flower touching costs, your plant touching costs. That can be, the seeds, the clones, the soil, nutrients going into that soil, tools and equipment that's not being capitalized. For instance, that would be your smaller tools, typically under $2,500, garden supplies, packing supplies, anything really related to that grow operation mainly. But then for people who are vertically integrated, for instance, let's say they have a grow operation, they have a processing facility, and they have retail, and some of those employees work between different verticals. They need to make sure they're allocating that time. They can't put all of Jim's time to cost of goods and allocate that in the grow operation if he's also working as an admin or in the retail. So you really got to be mindful even of payroll, who's working where, and make sure you've got time logs to represent that as well. Because there have been cases where vertically integrated companies had tried to push everything into that grow operation and they get they get nicked for it, unfortunately.
And while we're on the topic of 280E, if you can, this is a question from the Q&A. How do debt agreements or loan repayments affect 280E? Are those deductions prior to accounting direct and indirect cost of goods sold?
So loan agreements typically are a balance sheet item. You don't deduct your loan, you can only deduct your interest. And that's considered an operating expense. So depending on, I mean, obviously without knowing the entire scope of the business, that would not be included in cost of goods sold, but it would, every single aspect of cost, 280E is case specific. So I want you to be mindful of that as well.
Another question, this is a lob, I would say, is could you please clarify cannabis-friendly banks?
Yes. So not all banks are cannabis friendly. And what I mean by that, if they have not clearly stated either to you in writing, it's not on their website or anywhere else listed publicly, and they find out you're working with cannabis, this goes for even hemp CBD sometimes. They will close your account and lock you out. And sometimes you may not even get all your money back, because if you did not disclose that you're working in cannabis and the bank finds out about it, that can be some proprietary issues happening as well. And there could be penalties and fees associated with that also. So find a cannabis friendly bank. Full disclosure, I would never recommend that you hide the details. It's costly to find a cannabis specific bank, but it's better than paying tens of thousands of dollars in penalties because your bank finds out that you work in cannabis and they do not allow it.
There's also implications for your employees who are working for you, who may inadvertently, it's not just your business account that could suffer. It may also be your employees' personal accounts that can suffer. And it also extends to getting a home loan, not being able to find a bank to finance you. A lot of credit unions, they've kind of come to save the day, or banks with state charters will often jump in and are able to help. And it's been a boon for them. It's crazy to me to think that the larger banking industry hasn't jumped on this huge, this $1 billion, that's, $1 billion industry floating around out there. But until that happens, absolutely be mindful of the banks you're choosing, and try to ensure that you are setting yourself up again for success by choosing a bank that's going to allow you to do your banking, and also that it's going to allow your employees to do their banking too. Let me see if we have, we're right up against the time. Let me see if there's one more question. There is a Q&A at the bottom, Angela, of the screen. If you look, it says Q&A to the left of the chat. Let's see.
I think my view might be different because I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah, I see that. If friends and family are going to give or lend you money for the business, how may that affect your cannabis license application? Does that have any implications?
That would depend on your state agencies, and also whether or not these friends or family members have criminal records in some cases. I think some people forget about that aspect, that in some states there are limitations on that, in addition to number of licenses and all that. So it kind of depends on the state you're operating in and those state specific rules and regulations.
That's right. There's always, they want to make sure the money's not coming from illegitimate sources. They also want to make sure that there's no violation of license caps going on. So anyone who donates in certain states, people who donate a certain amount of money or a certain percentage of money will be required to fill out background checks. So, be sure that one, the money is clean, and two, the people giving the money are also clean. But really the first step, and there's another question related to getting started with a business in Louisiana, the first step is to read the regulations. Go to the state's local regulatory authority website, find the regulations and start at page 1 and don't stop until you get to the end. At that point, you yourself should be somewhat of a subject matter expert. So these states often offer guidance on filling out the application and just the application process in general. You're going to need a location. You're going to need to identify what type of business it is you want to do. There's a lot more that goes into getting started. And Shanice, this is in response to you. If you have questions about that, feel free to connect with me offline and I can help walk you through that process. But that's all we have for time right now. I'm sorry that we're not able to get to the rest of the questions. There are some really great questions. Nikki, if you want to shoot me that question offline, Angela and I can get that answered. Someone says, please go over questions from time. Yeah, we'd love to follow up with you guys individually offline. Thank you so much for joining. Angela, thank you so much for giving us this awesome presentation. The recording will be available for folks who want a copy of the slides. We can send them via PDF. Please reach out to us for that. Again, our contact info is on the screen. Everyone, thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.
Thanks so much, Kim.